Hi, I'm Arthur, and today I'm going to talk about what is probably considered the biggest threat in the galaxy, and how it probably happened by accident. The Tyranids. There are many angles from which you can discuss the Tyranids. They are quite an interesting species, but the best way I can describe them to you, and the threat that they occupy, is probably by setting the scene of how they were originally discovered. I want you to imagine you're on a vessel piloting its way to a known planet called Tyran. As you exit warp space after a long travel period with many deaths, you exit to see it. The planet you've come here to restock and regroup yourself for the next journey. But what you are seeing isn't a planet. It's a vacant ball of useless, dull gray rock. It has been drained of all heat, water, minerals, plants, and animals. You check your charts to make sure you didn't just skip to the wrong planet, but here it is. Tyran, completely devoid of anything conceivably usable. Before you can figure out what's going on, your sensors start to go off. Something is approaching you at breakneck speeds. Your astropath, the person necessary for you to initiate warp jumps and travel faster than just a meager pace, suddenly starts to convulse and seize, blood pouring from every open orifice, from eyes to nose to pores to fingertips. And that's when you see it on the viewfinder. You lay your eyes on something more ghastly and repulsive than any orc or chaos spawn you could fathom. A wholly organic spacecraft resembling a giant gaping maw. It is spewing forth millions of small organisms resembling flagellated darts with teeth that wriggle through the void, latching onto your ship, pouring in small eel-like monstrosities that tear apart whatever organic matter they see. These are the least of your worries, as you hear the distant rumbling and growling of larger bioforms that came in on larger versions of the self-propelled bio-vessels that initially dropped in those eel-like monstrosities. You hear screaming as crew begin to scramble and fight back desperately, but are overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of these insectoid masses that climb into the ship and shred people apart. The bodies will soon be dissolved and turned into raw matter to be used to make more of these creatures. The metal stripped to arm them with bioorganic weapons and harden the shells on their bodies, and you won't even be a memory, as you will be consumed for resources. Yeah, the Tyranids are fucking horrifying. They are just the grim, darkest threat of the 41st millennia. They do not feel, only think. They do not care, only want, and all they want is to consume. They are hunger that is endless. Yeah, it's hard to make them funny, because they are in fact one of the most actually scary things in the setting. They don't fight with zeal or righteousness. They fight with a cold and calculating ideal of cost versus reward. So if they don't get the material they need to expand or continue, they leave and come back later when they can take it. To put it bluntly, Tyranids are like xenomorphs from Aliens, but fed exclusively on a diet consisting of steak and anabolic growth hormone. They are a species that can adapt and evolve in short order to anything, creating numerous different castes of entities that can survive and kill whatever they have to evolve against. A good example is they were fighting against another alien race known as the Tau once upon a time, whom, if you're unfamiliar, have hyper-advanced plasma-based and pulse-based weaponry, using synced pulse technology that, I don't know, it's stupid sci-fi jargon. They just fired magic lightning guns at things. So they were fighting the Tyranids. The Tyranids, having died pretty quickly upon the initial assault, began to evolve this thin coating of reflective slime that would secrete from the pores, the gaps in their shells, that would either rebound or nullify the plasma and pulse fire from their weaponry. It basically made it so that their entire arsenal of weaponry was useless against the Tyranids, so they could just rip them to pieces. If you fight Tyranids long enough without winning or getting ground, they will adapt and overcome. It is just a matter of time. High-yield missiles that fire slowly? They will adapt slower-moving bioforms that have longer range, covered in thick armor in order to outrange you, outgun you, and out-armor your missiles. Short-range melee infantry? Oh, they'll specialize in the fastest-moving snake-like serpent creatures that can go in without worrying of getting any damage whatsoever, sneak past your armor, and inject you with a poison that means that they don't have to deal with you and you're just a gibbering mass of melting bio-goop that they will cart away in worms. Best way to think of them is like Borg from Star Trek, but made of meat. They have a degree of sentience that is unknown, but they do have an understanding of tactics, and can overwhelm things pretty easily depending on most situations. The best example as to the cosmic horror of the whole situation and the level of sentiences they have is that they have a vast network of a hive mind. The intelligences of every single entity, from the smallest little slug with teeth to the biggest swarm lord, all congeal together into this hive mind. It's a many-thinking mind, but it is a singular entity that can manually take control and issue commands to each individual as long as they maintain this kind of psychic pylon structure. Best way to see it, imagine giant radio tower. That radio tower is the hive mind, and it needs to conduct the signal to everyone that can hear it. So the signal is shot out, and the radio receiver will pump out the sound that if any of the lesser insects or the lesser Tyranid bioforms hear, they listen to it and they react to it. So the receivers in this case are the major Tyranid insect, the hive tyrants, the swarm lords, these massive insects that function as commander bugs. That's how it works, but there is an origination of signal. One of my favorite moments in the lore is during, I believe, in the devastation of Baal. There was a moment where they were luring the Tyranids into a trap, and a single one of these minor bioforms stepped forward. It was what's called a Hormagaunt. It walked forward from a line of Tyranids and started staring at the enemies in front of them that were obviously luring them into a charge, and it simply stared at them. And from the perspective of the Marine that was staring at it, he looked into its eyes for a second and could tell something wasn't right. This wasn't just a Tyranid. This wasn't just some mindless predatory bug. They could tell that the entity they were looking at was in direct contact with the hive mind, and he could see the internal thoughts, metaphorically speaking, of some unthinkable, unknowable, godlike eldritch horror. Terrifying to think about. A good example as to how they can adapt is with one of my favorite hive fleets. And we'll get into what hive fleets are in just a second. But it's an entire Tyranid grouping that specialized in dealing with a target that Tyranids cannot fight. Tyranids will only fight if they are guaranteed to get biomass more than what they would use. And in order to justify doing that, they need to use less resources than they get. Chaos demons and warp magic shit does not leave a body to be eaten. When you kill a corn demon, it goes back to the warp. So, it doesn't matter how much biomass a Tyranid uses to kill it, it's always going to come out as a sum negative. That's where Hive Fleet Cronus comes in. Hive Fleet Cronus specializes in dealing with demons by creating bioforms specifically that are anti-psychic and that fire small-cost ammunition from a range, so they don't have to get up close, which is the demon's specialty, and instead of having to fight them head-on, they just have the ability to ignore them most times, or just deal with them from a range and do whatever they were going to do on that planet. There are numerous hive fleets, each one having evolved radically with different specializations and cute insectoid color schemes. I kind of like the weird purple, pink, and blue that they got for this one. They are kind of the main concern in the setting right now. Like, it seems like in 10th edition there's going to be Dark Angels versus Tyranids, and there's going to be new Tyranids and new Dark Angels. And if the leaks are correct, then yeah, that does make sense, because apparently the Lion's coming back and we're getting like an Apex Swarm Lord. One last thing that I do want to mention about them is one of the most interesting phenomena that is around them. And I don't know if it's ever explicitly stated what it is. It is simply referred to as the Shadow in the Warp, where if Tyranids show up, specifically the Tyranid brain bugs, like those big leader casts that I was describing before, there is this presence that is projected upon all psychic entities nearby. If you are not psychic, and you're near one of these Tyranid brain bugs, you just feel uncomfortable. Imagine the feeling you get when you're in the basement at night. You turn off the lights and you're walking up the stairs. You feel like something is chasing after you. You feel like if you slow down for a second, you are going to get grabbed and something bad's going to happen to you. That's how the feeling was kind of described for people who are not psychic. If you are psychic, and you are like not Mephiston or a majorly powerful psyker, you are probably going to collapse to the ground convulsing and probably die. Most psykers who are pretty weak cannot handle the shadow and the warp. Some that are strong can. An interesting fact about Cronus again is their shadow and the warp is so thick and so dense that it'll kill most psykers that are near it, like within a kilometer range of any brain bug that would have it. Psykers are not really good at dealing with them, which sucks. That's kind of gonna lead me to my thesis statement of I feel like Tyranids really fit this setting. I feel like the initial writers who made the Tyranids did not really think about the long-lasting repercussions of I win forever, you can't beat me because I just get better insects. So we're kind of getting to a point now where they've just kept ramping up the scale in lore. There was an ancient alien king by the name of the Silent King who came back from a long exile to help his people, and the reason why was the Tyranids. Which, if you don't know anything about the Silent King, him being intimidated or nervous about anything should fucking frighten you. Him coming back saying the Tyranids are such a big problem, how I don't think they've had like many substantial losses in the entirety of their existence. So it just feels like there's nothing that the main setting can do. Like with Chaos, you have Gilliman, you have these new psychers that are coming out that are able to combat Chaos. You've got the fucking Sword of the Emperor that can fight, and probably the Lion. So Chaos is kind of a non-threat, even with Angron going around doing that Berserker Curse thing. But with Tyranids, I don't know if there's anything you can do to beat them, which is kind of going to be interesting to see what they do with that, because with 10th edition coming around, they're definitely going to be putting a lot more lore into it, and hopefully releasing a new fucking Red Terror model. I miss that guy. My precious little red baby boy aside, as much as I want to complain about Tyranids, I can't. Their models are so cool. Their lore is just so terrifying in like that really eldritch way. It's just, the only thing I have a problem with them is their power scaling is so out of whack with the rest of the setting that it makes everything else that's super killy and like unstoppable seem kind of quaint in comparison. That's the Tyranids. I hope that it was entertaining to hear me go on these long rants. This was a little bit less scripted than I usually do, so I hope it was easily followed. Aside from that, as per the usual, I know I only touched upon Cronus as a hive fleet, and there's like a dozen others that are kind of major. I'm going to cover them all individually at some point because they've been around for quite a long time, and I'm really interested in discussing them at length and learning about them. So let me know in the comments what your favorite hive fleet is, and if enough people say the same one, that might be the first one I cover. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe, because if you couldn't tell, I upload a lot, and people seem to be enjoying everything, so keep on keeping on, I guess. Fun fact. The Zerg from StarCraft were originally supposed to be Tyranids, but instead of being Tyranids in purple, they became Zerg in the same color as poop. Hello. I'm here once again to send off the video. I thank you all for watching. I really had a lot of fun looking up the Tyranid lore because there's a lot of weird shenanigans that are involved in it. And I don't know which hive fleet I'm going to cover first when I come back to them, but I know I'm going to come back to them at some point. I'm leaning towards like the basic Leviathan and then going off from there, but I could do a swerve and maybe do like Hydra or Behemoth or something like that. Tell me below what you think. If you want me to cover one, I might do it. If you have an obscure one that's particularly weird, just tell me about it in the comments. I'll definitely check. Make sure to look at every comment that's posted. But yeah, thanks again for watching. See you next time.